The signal had gone out at noon Earth Standard Time. It wasn't a desperate plea, not at first. It was something more like a hand raised in a crowd, a simple hello tossed into the endless dark. The men and women at the array had worked for years to perfect it, a transmission woven with every scrap of beauty they could muster. Music, equations, stories, images of laughing children and green fields. A symphony of humanity packed into a golden thread and flung into the stars. The hope was simple: someone would answer. Anyone. They waited. Weeks passed. Then months. The night sky stayed silent, except for the usual cold, unblinking stars that had watched over them for millions of years without saying a word. At first, people made jokes about it. It was easy, even comforting, to believe that no answer meant nothing at all. Maybe the message hadn't reached anyone yet. Maybe the universe was just too big, too lonely. But somewhere deep down, a slow, heavy fear started to take root. It wasn't the fear of being alone. It was the fear that they were not alone, and were simply being ignored. That thought dug in deep, under the skin, under the jokes, under the endless speeches about scientific patience and long-term goals. The transmission had been loud, powerful, the finest technology Earth had ever produced. It hadn't been a whisper into the night. It had been a shout, raw and wild, a cry to the heavens so bright it would have lit up the skies of any world it touched. Someone had heard it. Someone had chosen not to answer. Years went by. The project was archived, then forgotten by most. Funding dried up. The array, once buzzing with energy and hope, fell into dust and silence, abandoned like a grave marker for a civilization that had dared to dream too big. Most people moved on. Not everyone. There were some who couldn't let it go. Scientists, dreamers, conspiracy theorists. Call them whatever you wanted. They believed the silence meant something. They believed it was a message of its own. The world above, the one most people lived in, kept spinning with all its noise. Wars, elections, disasters, and tiny victories. Cities grew fatter, skies grew dimmer. Technology marched forward with or without dreams to guide it. Beneath it all, that old question pulsed like a hidden drumbeat. Why didn't they answer? Nobody noticed when the second signal came. It wasn't like the first one. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't hopeful. It wasn't even human. It was short. Sure. A string of pulses so perfectly measured they could only have been deliberate. A pattern. A signature. A knocking at the door of the universe. 3 short bursts. Silence. 3 short bursts. Silence. Then nothing. It took weeks for anyone to notice. The old satellite dishes, half dead and rusting, had picked it up almost by accident. An engineer named Carson, tired, underpaid, and 3 cups deep into bad coffee, had flagged it one night because he thought the machine was glitching. Static, he wrote in the log. Possible interference. We'll recheck. He didn't recheck. 2 days later, Carson's supervisor found the entry, listened to the recording, and froze in his chair. His face went white. He played it again. And again. 3 bursts. Silence. 3 bursts. Silence. Every hair on his arm stood up. There was no mistaking it. It was a reply. But not the kind anyone had wanted. The message was sent quietly to the Department of Space Affairs, flagged as non-urgent, low priority because nobody wanted to believe it could be real. By the time someone with the right clearance level saw it, weeks had passed. The world above spun on, oblivious. And by then it was already too late. The first ship arrived just after midnight, slipping through the blackness like a shadow. No lights. No signals. No demands. No greetings. It hovered above Earth's orbit for a full hour. Just watching. Telescopes spotted it by accident. A lone hobbyist, scanning the skies from a rooftop in the outskirts of Jakarta, caught it on a jittery feed. His hands shook so badly he dropped his camera. He posted the footage online, laughing, thinking it was some kind of prank drone or a new government project. It wasn't. The thing moved like no human craft ever had, not flying exactly, not hovering exactly, but shifting position with the ease of something that had never known gravity as anything more than a suggestion. It didn't speak. It didn't flash lights. It simply watched. Then it vanished. Not a puff of smoke. Not a blur of speed. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone like it had never existed. Panic didn't come right away. Most people thought the footage was fake. Those who believed it were too few, too scattered to make a difference. But some people knew better. Governments scrambled behind closed doors. Old treaties were dusted off. Defense projects that had been buried in classified vaults were pulled out, examined, updated. It was a mess, a slow, clumsy, frightened mess, because humans, for all their cleverness, had never truly believed this day would come. And worse, they had no idea what it meant. For days nothing happened. Then the second ship arrived. Then the third. Soon the sky above Earth was crowded with silent watchers, hanging just beyond the reach of any missile, any defense system. People started to notice. Social media exploded. Newscasters wore strained smiles as they reported unusual atmospheric phenomena and begged people to remain calm. Calm didn't last long. When the first city vanished, there were no survivors. No warning. No weapons. Just a soft hum in the air like the world itself was taking a breath, and then, nothing. Where skyscrapers had stood, where cars had crawled, where children had played in sunlit parks, there was only smooth, black glass. Perfect. Untouched. Silent. The governments of Earth demanded answers. The sky gave none. Weapons were launched. Every kind of weapon humanity had ever built, from slow, lumbering missiles to high-energy beams and orbital kinetic strikes. They all vanished before touching the ships, absorbed like rain hitting the ocean. It wasn't a war. It wasn't an invasion. It was something else. Something colder. A message. We heard you. We chose not to speak. Now we speak. There were no translations, no negotiations. No demands. Only that terrible silence, heavier than any words. Cities fell. Not all at once. A few here, a few there. As if someone were picking petals off a flower, studying it. The people who survived fled to the countryside, to the mountains, to the deep places where they thought they might be forgotten. Some whispered about surrender. Some spoke of building weapons bigger, better, faster. But the old ones, the ones who remembered the first transmission, the ones who had dreamed of reaching the stars, they understood. It had never been about communication. It had been about judgment. Humanity had called out to the stars. The stars had looked back. And the stars had not liked what they saw. Somewhere, deep in the earth, an old scientist named Reese stared at the last backup of the first transmission. The music, the laughter, the hope. The desperate, stupid, wonderful belief that they could be part of something bigger. He sat there for hours, in the cold, dark bunker, listening to it over and over. When the door pounded above, 3 short knocks, then silence, 3 short knocks, then silence, he didn't move. He just sat there, listening until the last light flickered out. Reese didn't know how long he sat there after the last light went out. It could have been minutes, hours. Time felt different now, slower somehow, like the world outside the bunker wasn't moving at the same speed anymore. The pounding on the door had stopped. Silence wrapped around him, thick and smothering. His hands trembled, resting uselessly on the cracked leather of his chair. For a long time he simply listened, to the recording, to the memories, to the weight of what he had helped create. They had wanted to believe so badly. We are here, the message had said. Look at us. We are kind. We are clever. We are worth knowing. Now the answer had come, and it wasn't a voice. It was an eraser wiping them away piece by piece. Reese stood up slowly, his joints crackling like old paper. He crossed the bunker in a few unsteady steps, his fingers brushing against the thick steel walls, the dusty tables covered in half-sorted files, the radio equipment that hadn't buzzed in days. The backup transmitter sat dead in the corner. He reached for it anyway. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was insane. But part of him couldn't let it go. The belief that someone might still be out there, someone different from the ones who now watched the skies like silent executioners. He flipped the main switch. Nothing happened. The generator above was gone, probably taken in one of the first strikes. He stared at the dead screen for a long moment, then dropped his hand. In the end, it didn't matter. The ones who had answered weren't here to talk. He turned back toward the heavy door. It stood like a wall between him and the world, scarred with deep, unnatural burns. Whatever had been knocking wasn't human. Reese pressed his forehead against the cold steel. He didn't pray. He didn't weep. He just whispered, "I'm sorry." Somewhere in the distance, a low hum began to build, faint at first, then swelling like a storm gathering on the edge of hearing. The floor vibrated under his feet. Dust danced in the stale air. Reese stepped back. The door shuddered. He staggered toward the inner corridor, heart pounding. His boots scraped against the concrete. The walls pulsed around him, vibrating in time with the sound. Whatever was coming wasn't in a hurry. It knew he had nowhere left to run. Halfway down the hall, he stumbled into the emergency hatch, a narrow shaft leading even deeper underground, a relic from Cold War paranoia. He threw the latch and dropped inside, landing hard on a rusted ladder. His ribs flared with pain, but he forced himself to climb down, one aching rung at a time. Above him, the bunker door groaned. A blast of cold air slammed down the shaft, whipping at him like icy fingers. He didn't look up. The bottom of the shaft opened into an old maintenance tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through. Reese squeezed into it, scraping his elbows raw against the jagged concrete. The hum grew louder. His breath came in shallow gasps, white and ragged in the freezing air. He crawled faster. Somewhere behind him, something slipped into the shaft. It moved without sound. No breathing. No heavy steps. Just the faintest scrape of something gliding along the metal walls. Reese's vision blurred. His fingers went numb. He crawled blindly, the tunnel twisting and narrowing until finally, blessedly, he saw it, a sliver of pale gray light leaking through a cracked bulkhead. The old emergency exit. He slammed into it shoulder first, praying the rusted locks would give. They didn't. The thing behind him moved closer. Reese threw his weight against the door again. And again. His shoulder screamed with pain. His heartbeat roared in his ears. On the third try the lock snapped. The door burst open and he tumbled out into the open air, blinking against the weak daylight. For a moment he just lay there, gasping. Then he forced himself up and looked around. The world was unrecognizable. Ash floated down from a sky the color of bruises. The hills beyond the bunker were blackened, scorched. Trees stood like charred bones against the smudged horizon. In the far distance, the city, or what was left of it, was nothing more than a flat, glassy scar. Reese stumbled forward. He didn't know where he was going. There was nowhere left to go. Above him, the watchers hung in the sky, vast and unmoving. Cold metal gods. Indifferent. A soft whisper drifted through the dead air. Not a word. Not a voice. A feeling. Run. He did. He ran until his lungs burned and his vision blurred. Until the bunker was just another shadow in the ruined landscape. Until the thing behind him, whatever it was, faded into the endless gray. Hours passed. Or days. He didn't know. Time was broken here. Eventually he found others. Not many. A scattering of people hiding in the burned-out shells of old houses, in the caves and ravines the bombs had missed. Eyes wide, faces hollowed by fear and hunger. They didn't ask questions. There was no point. They all knew. Humanity wasn't at war. They were being judged. And they were losing. Reese sat with them around a pitiful fire one night, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7, sat beside him, her face streaked with soot. She didn't speak. She just stared at the flames, her small hands clenched tight in her lap. He wanted to tell her something. Something to make it better. Instead, he found himself whispering the old transmission under his breath, like a prayer. Music, laughter, hope. The things that had once defined them. The things that, somehow, had failed to matter. Across the fire, an older woman watched him. Her face was sharp and lined, her eyes hollow but burning with something fierce. She leaned in close, voice rough as gravel. They never answered, she said. Reese nodded. They were always there, she whispered. Watching. Waiting. He didn't know if she was right. He didn't know if it mattered anymore. The sky rumbled. The watchers shifted. The next city would fall soon. The little girl reached for his hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Reese held on tight. Somewhere out there, hidden beyond the reach of satellites and soldiers and fear, humanity's last embers flickered. Not gone yet. Not dead yet. And maybe, just maybe, that still meant something. The fire cracked. The ground shook. In the distance, the black ships began to move. Reese hadn't spoken much since the night around the fire. The words seemed to catch in his throat now, like something heavy he couldn't cough out. Every time he tried, the image of the empty sky, the broken city, the silent watchers made it all feel pointless. But silence didn't mean nothing was happening. The little camp had begun to shift. Faces he didn't know appeared some mornings, exhausted and filthy, their eyes darting around like trapped animals. Some stayed. Some left again. None smiled. Nobody ever smiled anymore. One night, an older man sat beside him, dragging a battered satchel between his boots. His hair was thin, his face rough with scars. Reese didn't ask his name. Nobody really asked anymore. Names felt fragile now, like old photographs catching fire. The man stared into the dying flames, his voice barely above a whisper. I was there, he said. When they first came. Reese didn't look at him. He just listened. Was working an outpost, the man continued, a hollow laugh in his chest. Science station. Built for listening. You know, for picking up whispers from the dark. Reese nodded faintly. The man pulled something from his bag, a crumpled photo, creased and stained. He didn't show it, just stared at it with something broken in his face. Used to think the universe was a big open hand, he muttered. Just waiting for us to find it? He shook his head. It wasn't a hand. It was a fist. The fire cracked, sending a spray of sparks up into the smoky air. Somewhere beyond the camp's edge, a low, mechanical hum drifted over the hills, making everyone tense up for a moment. Then as quickly as it came, it faded. The man tucked the photo back into his satchel. They answered the wrong part of us, he said. Not the music, not the hope. They heard the anger. The hunger. Reese felt a chill snake up his spine. What do you mean? He asked, his voice rusty with disuse. The man smiled sadly like he was already a ghost. You think we were the only ones listening? He stood up and shuffled into the dark, leaving the question hanging in the air like smoke. Reese didn't sleep that night. Instead, he lay awake staring at the stars, or where the stars should have been. Now they were hidden behind layers of thick clouds and the heavy shapes of the watchers. He thought about the message they had sent. The music, the laughter, the promises. He thought about how quiet the universe had been for so long. Maybe they hadn't ignored them. Maybe they had been waiting. Waiting for something small and foolish enough to call out, to show itself. And when it did, a cold breeze rattled through the ruined trees. Reese tightened the blanket around his shoulders and tried to forget the feeling of something unseen moving just beyond the edge of hearing. At dawn, the camp packed what little they had and moved. No one spoke about it. No one argued. It was just understood. Stay in one place too long and the watchers found you. And when they did, they didn't announce themselves. They simply erased. The group moved through the broken countryside like shadows, sticking to the thickets and the gullies, keeping low whenever the black ships drifted overhead. Reese walked near the back, the little girl tucked against his side. She still didn't speak. She hadn't said a single word since he found her. But she never let go of his hand. Sometimes that was enough. Days blurred into each other. Hunger gnawed at them all. Water was harder to find now. Everything tasted of ash. The world felt smaller somehow, like it had shrunk into just the few miles they could walk without dying. One afternoon, as they crossed what had once been a freeway, Reese spotted something strange in the wreckage of an old truck. A glint of blue. He knelt down, brushing away the charred debris. It was a data core. A small one, the kind used for emergency broadcast. His fingers trembled as he pried it loose. He didn't dare power it up there exposed. But later, once the group found shelter under the twisted remains of a highway overpass, he sat with the thing cradled in his lap, staring at it like it might bite him. The little girl watched silently from across the fire. Reese took a shaky breath and connected the core to the old cracked tablet he still carried in his pack. For a moment, nothing. Then a flicker. Static, hissing and sputtering. Then a voice crackling through the cheap speakers. This is Dr. Haynes. If anyone is still receiving this, listen carefully. They aren't what we thought. The transmission cut out for a moment, replaced by a low, grinding sound that made Reese's teeth ache. The voice came back, urgent and broken. Not invincible. Not God's. Weakness. Another burst of static. Then silence. Reese stared at the screen. The others leaned in, faces pale and hungry for any scrap of hope. He played it again. And again. The message was short. Fragmented. But it was enough. Weakness. They had a weakness. The knowledge sparked something dangerous and bright deep inside Reese's chest. A feeling he hadn't allowed himself in a long time. Hope. It scared him more than the Watchers ever could. Because hope could get you killed faster than anything else. The old man from the fire, the one with the satchel, approached from the shadows, his mouth set in a grim line. Where'd you find that? He rasped. Reese didn't answer. Didn't need to. The man nodded. You know what that means, don't you? Reese swallowed hard. It means we're not finished, he said. The man laughed, a dry, broken sound. No, he said. It means we just became a threat. The fire sputtered in the wind. Above them the Watchers stirred. The group didn't move the next day. Or the day after. They stayed hidden, silent, listening to the static of the data core, parsing every broken word like it was scripture. They argued in whispers. Some said it was a trap, that the message had been planted, bait to draw out the last survivors. Others believed it was real. Reese didn't know what he believed. But he knew one thing. They couldn't stay passive forever. Hiding would only delay the inevitable. Sooner or later the Watchers would find them. And when they did, there would be no fight. Just erasure. The little girl tugged at his sleeve one evening as the camp huddled in the half-light, arguing quietly among themselves. She pointed at the sky. At first he didn't see anything. Then, there. A flicker. Tiny. Fast. Something moving against the Watchers. Not running from them. Moving toward them. The others saw it too. Gasps and whispers rippled through the camp. What was that? Is it another ship? Maybe someone's fighting back. Reese's heart hammered in his chest. It was impossible to tell from the ground. Could have been anything. A drone. A fragment of a satellite. Even a trick of the ruined atmosphere. But deep down he felt it. Something had changed. The next morning they moved again. West toward the mountains. Rumors traveled with them like ghosts. Other camps. Other survivors. Strange signals picked up on scavenged radios. Whispers of resistance. And something else. Something worse. Stories about places where the Watchers didn't just erase cities, they changed them. Molded them into twisted shapes, half organic, half machine. Warnings scratched into the ruins by trembling hands. Don't go near the towers. Reese asked an old woman about it one night as they trudged through a narrow valley, the dead trees looming overhead. She just shook her head. Not for us to know, she said. Not anymore. He didn't ask again. But the images lingered in his mind. Towers of flesh and steel, pulsing with dark energy. Cities reshaped into warnings. The Watchers carving the earth like a sculptor with no love for his clay. What had they awakened? Why had no one answered them before? Maybe they had. Maybe the real message had been silence. And humanity had been too desperate, too lonely to hear it. The group grew quieter with each mile. Their numbers thinned. Some wandered off in the night. Others simply didn't wake up in the morning. No one spoke of it. No one dared. Reese clung to the little girl's hand like a lifeline. At night, he would stare into the darkness and feel the weight of the unanswered questions crushing him. Who were they? What did they want? And most of all, what was left of humanity to fight for? The days stretched thin and brittle. The mountains loomed closer. And somewhere out there, hidden in the ruins and the ash, was the answer. Or the end. Maybe both. The trail narrowed as they climbed, the ground crumbling beneath their feet. The old highway was nothing more than broken stones now, split and overgrown with thorny vines that tore at their clothes and skin. Every step was a quiet war against the mountain itself. At night, the temperature dropped sharply. Frost clung to the rocks and their breath smoked in the air. There was no fire anymore. It was too dangerous. Light could be seen. Light meant death. Instead, they huddled together for warmth, sharing what little body heat they had left. The little girl curled against Reese's chest, shivering even under his jacket. He wrapped his arms around her and listened to the empty night. Somewhere beyond the peaks he knew the Watchers drifted. They never slept. They never needed to. The dream started then. At first, Reese thought it was just the cold and the hunger playing tricks on his mind. But when he woke with a start one night, gasping, he saw the old man sitting across from him, his eyes wide and haunted. You saw it too, didn't you? The man whispered. Reese didn't answer. He didn't have to. They had both seen the same thing, a shape in the dark. Not the Watchers, something older. Something buried deep under the mountains, waiting. A voice, not spoken but felt, thrumming through his bones. Come closer. The next morning the group found the first marker. A slab of blackened stone, half buried in the scree. Symbols carved deep into its face. Not human symbols but something more jagged, angular. Wrong. The little girl approached it first. The others shouted at her, but she didn't stop. She knelt before the stone, her small hands tracing the grooves with a kind of terrible reverence. Reese pulled her back, heart hammering. She looked up at him then, her eyes clearer than he had ever seen them. They're afraid, she said. It was the first time she had spoken. The words were like a blow. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Not fear. Certainty. The others stood frozen, the cold wind whipping around them. No one spoke. No one dared. They're afraid, she repeated, softer this time, almost to herself. Reese glanced at the old man, but he offered no comfort, no answers. Just that same wide-eyed terror. They moved faster after that, driven by a fear they didn't dare name. Days blurred into endless gray. The mountains pressed tighter around them, cliffs rising like jagged teeth. At times they had to crawl on hands and knees through narrow passages, the stone pressing close enough to scrape skin raw. Food ran out first, then water. The weaker ones fell behind, their faces hollowed by exhaustion and despair. Reese wanted to help them. He really did. But he had the girl to think about. He couldn't save everyone. Not anymore. At night the dreams got worse. The voice grew louder. Come closer. He woke with blood on his hands once, though he didn't know whose it was. No one mentioned it in the morning. Maybe they didn't see. Maybe they pretended not to. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered now but reaching whatever waited beyond the peaks. One afternoon, as the sun bled through a tear in the clouds, they stumbled across something impossible. A door. Set into the rock itself, half buried by time and landslides. Smooth, black, seamless, a scar in the earth. No handle. No hinges. Just a faint hum in the air around it, like a low note held just out of hearing. Rhys stared at it, his mouth dry. The old man laughed, a short, broken sound. "I told you," he rasped. "I told you there were things buried out here." "What is it?" someone whispered. The old man shook his head. "Not what," he said. "Who?" Before anyone could stop her, the little girl stepped forward. She pressed her palm against the black surface. For a moment, nothing. Then a pulse. A ripple through the stone like a breath. The door began to open. A thin line of white light split down the middle, widening slowly, groaning under the weight of centuries. The others backed away, but Rhys couldn't move. He couldn't even blink. Beyond the door, a tunnel stretched into the mountain's heart, lined with metal and flickering lights. The air that spilled out was cold and sterile, tasting of electricity and something older. The girl turned to look at Rhys, her expression calm. "We have to go," she said simply. He didn't know why he trusted her. Maybe because she had survived when so many others hadn't. Maybe because she seemed to know. Or maybe because hope, once kindled, was a hard thing to kill. He nodded. One by one the others followed, stepping into the darkness. The door closed behind them with a soft sigh, sealing them inside. The tunnel was long and featureless. Their footsteps echoed strangely, like the walls themselves were listening. Strange markings lined the walls, glowing faintly with an eerie, cold light. Not human. Not even close. Yet somehow they felt familiar, like a half-forgotten song from a dream. At intervals, small panels flickered to life, showing glimpses of other places. Other worlds. Worlds twisted and broken. Worlds where the Watchers had already passed. Rhys forced himself to look away. Ahead, the little girl walked with purpose, leading them deeper into the mountain. The old man limped beside him, muttering under his breath. "This wasn't built for us," he said. "Wasn't meant for us." Rhys gritted his teeth. "Then who?" The old man's eyes gleamed with a feverish light. "The first ones," he whispered. "The ones who came before us. Before everything." The words made Rhys's skin crawl. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. And there, in the center, floating above a pedestal of black stone, was the source of the dreams. A sphere. Perfect. Silent. Radiating a soft, pulsing light that seemed to vibrate inside his skull. The girl approached it without hesitation. Rhys wanted to shout. To stop her. But his voice died in his throat. The girl reached out, and the sphere responded. Images flooded his mind. Not visions. Not memories. Instructions. Maps. Codes. Weapons. A history older than human language, written in fire and pain and blood. He staggered back, clutching his head. The others dropped to their knees, moaning, overwhelmed. Only the girl stood tall, her eyes glowing faintly. She turned back to them, her voice deeper, layered with something that wasn't entirely human. "They heard our call," she said. But not all of them agreed. Rhys struggled to his feet, heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" The girl smiled sadly. "There were those who wanted to help us. To warn us. They left this gift. A way to fight back." Rhys stared at the sphere, feeling its weight in his bones. "And the Watchers?" he asked hoarsely. The girl's smile faded. "They were not the only ones who heard us," she said. From somewhere deep within the mountain, a new sound echoed, low and resonant, like a heartbeat made of stone. The ground shivered beneath their feet. The old man scrambled to his feet, his voice sharp with terror. "We woke it," he hissed. "We woke it up." A deafening roar cut him off, rattling the very air. Far away, Rhys thought he could hear something massive stirring. Something ancient. The Watchers had been afraid. But not of humanity. Not even of the call itself. They had been afraid of what humanity might find. And now, whatever it was awake. The sphere pulsed faster, throwing stark shadows across the chamber walls. The girl stepped forward, her voice carrying a weight far beyond her small frame. "We must choose," she said. Another tremor rocked the ground. Behind them, in the tunnel, the black door began to shudder. The Watchers were coming. But so was something else. Something even they feared. Rhys clenched his fists, torn between terror and the raw, burning need to survive. The sphere hung before him, offering power he didn't understand. The Watchers were closing in. And deep within the mountain, something ancient was stirring from its endless sleep. The choice would tear them apart. One way or another. The mountain shook harder now. Dust rained from the ceiling of the massive chamber, and cracks formed underfoot, spiderwebbing across the stone floor. The girl stood frozen in front of the floating sphere, her small hands trembling but steady in their reach toward it. The others backed away instinctively, some stumbling, some crying out, but nobody dared to run. Where would they even go? The tunnel behind them was filled now with a low, terrible noise. Not footsteps. Not breathing. It was like 1,000 whispers all layered on top of each other, hissing promises and warnings at the same time. Cold and endless. The Watchers were coming. Rhys could feel them now, not just in the air but under his skin. That ancient fear that lived in the marrow of every living thing. The primal knowledge that something was hunting them. And yet, the greater terror still lay deeper inside the mountain. Something worse than the Watchers. Something older. The sphere pulsed again, a desperate, rapid beat, almost pleading. The little girl spoke without looking back at them, her voice steady but almost too calm, like she had already accepted what came next. We're not supposed to fight them alone. Rhys forced his body to move. Step by step, he crossed the shaking floor until he stood beside her. The sphere's light washed over his face and for a moment he saw himself reflected in its surface. Older, scarred, harder. A version of himself he didn't recognize. A version that had survived. Behind him, the old man shouted something. Maybe a warning, maybe a prayer, but the words were swallowed by another tremor that knocked them all to their knees. Through the tunnel, a shadow flickered. Tall. Thin. Moving faster than any human could. They were out of time. The girl reached up and touched the sphere with both hands. A surge of light exploded outward, throwing Rhys backward. He hit the ground hard, gasping, blinking spots from his vision. When he managed to look up, the chamber had changed. The walls, the stone itself, were shifting, pulling away like mist, revealing vast machines hidden beneath. Machines that hummed with a deep, endless power. In the center where the sphere floated, something new appeared. A figure. It wasn't a man. Not really. It was taller, its features sharp and strange, clothed in something that shimmered between colors, between worlds. Its eyes were deep pools of gold, ancient and tired. It looked at the girl. Then at Rhys. Then it spoke, though its mouth never moved. You called. Rhys scrambled to his feet, every instinct in his body screaming at him to run, to fight, to hide. But he stood his ground. Help us, he said, his voice raw. The figure's expression didn't change. You are late, it said. The gate has been breached. Behind them, the tunnel twisted unnaturally, and the first of the Watchers stepped into the chamber. They were worse up close. Bone-thin, their skin stretched too tight, their faces almost featureless. Their mouths opened but no words came, only that awful whispering sound. One stepped forward. Then another. More spilled into the chamber like smoke, surrounding them. Rhys felt the weight of despair crush down on him. There were too many. The old man stood at Rhys's side now, panting, his hands shaking as he raised a rusted piece of metal like a weapon. Futile. But brave. The figure from the sphere looked at the Watchers, then back at Rhys and the girl. You called for salvation, it said. But there is a cost. Rhys swallowed hard. What cost? The figure's gaze was endless. One must remain. Another quake shook the chamber, and a crack split the floor between them and the Watchers. For a moment it held them back. But not for long. Rhys turned to the girl. She looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes but no fear. I can do it, she said quietly. He shook his head, fierce and immediate. No. You have to protect them, she said. You have to get them out. The figure stepped closer. There is no time. The Watchers began to move again, their bodies twisting unnaturally, impossibly as they surged forward. The girl stepped toward the sphere. Rhys caught her arm. No, he rasped. There has to be another way. The figure's eyes softened, almost in pity. There is always another way. But it is not always one you would choose. The air crackled with energy. The machines hidden in the walls began to light up one by one, beams of light crisscrossing the chamber. Symbols flared to life across the floor, ancient runes that burned with cold fire. The Watchers shrieked in rage, their forms flickering and distorting. The girl placed her hand over Rhys's. You were the one who answered, she said. You stayed. You fought. That's why it has to be you who leads. The roar of the mountain grew louder, the world trembling around them. The old man was shouting something again, but Rhys couldn't hear. All he could see was her. A child who had survived horrors most adults couldn't even imagine. And now she was willing to sacrifice herself to save them all. Rhys shook his head again, but the figure's voice cut through his panic. Choose. The ground split wider. The The watchers leapt the gap, closing fast. Reese looked at the others, broken, battered, terrified. They needed a leader. They needed hope. And they needed time. The girl smiled at him, sad and fierce and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her face. It was her soul. Unbreakable. Reese let go of her arm. His heart broke with it. She turned to the figure. "I'm ready." The light around her grew blinding. Reese stumbled back, shielding his eyes. The watchers shrieked again, recoiling from the pure energy now pouring out of the girl's small body. The figure raised one hand. The machines answered. With a roar that shook the mountain to its foundations, a massive pulse exploded outward from the sphere, catching the watchers mid-stride. They screamed, not with rage but with real pain for the first time. They burned. The others watched, frozen in awe and terror, as the watchers were torn apart by the wave of power, dissolving into dust and shadow. But the price was being paid. Reese saw the girl's silhouette in the heart of the light, smaller now, fading. He wanted to run to her. He wanted to drag her back. But he knew if he did, it would all be for nothing. Tears streamed down his face as the last of the watchers fell. The chamber grew still. The light dimmed. The machines powered down, one by one, until only silence remained. In the center of the room the girl was gone. The sphere hovered alone, faint and cracked, its energy nearly spent. The figure turned to Reese. "The way is open," it said. "But it will not stay open for long." Reese's knees buckled and he dropped to the floor. The old man put a hand on his shoulder, his face pale and lined with grief. But they had survived. For now. The tunnel beyond the chamber shifted again, revealing a new path, a narrow, jagged passage lit by a sickly blue glow. The watchers were gone. But the deeper thing, the older thing, was still waking. The mountain shuddered, a deep, hungry growl rising from the depths. The figure looked at Reese one last time. "Run," it said. And then it vanished, leaving only the faint scent of ozone in the frozen air. Reese wiped his face with a shaking hand. He turned to the others. There were so few left now. But they were still breathing. Still fighting. He nodded once. Wordless. Then he turned toward the new tunnel. Toward whatever waited beyond. And he ran. Behind them, deep in the heart of the mountain, something massive shifted. The real enemy had heard their call. And this time it was answering. The tunnel wound downward at an impossible angle, like the mountain itself was trying to swallow them whole. Reese led the way, his heart hammering against his ribs, each step pulling him farther from what he had known and deeper into something far worse. The others followed, silent except for their labored breathing and the occasional stumble on the uneven floor. They were exhausted, broken in body and spirit, but they moved because stopping wasn't an option anymore. Not after everything they had lost. Not after her. Reese didn't let himself think about it. He couldn't. If he did, if he let himself fall into the weight of that grief, he'd never get up again. There would be time to mourn later, if there was a later. The tunnel walls began to change the deeper they went. The rough, natural stone gave way to something smoother, darker, almost alive. Strange veins of silver light pulsed along the walls, forming symbols that shifted when you weren't looking directly at them. The mountain wasn't just a hiding place. It was a machine. And it was waking up. A low hum filled the air, vibrating in their bones. The ground shook again, stronger this time, and a deep, resonant sound rumbled from somewhere below. A sound like a heartbeat, but far too slow and far too vast to belong to anything human. Ahead, the tunnel opened into another vast chamber. This one was worse. It wasn't empty. Rows upon rows of tall, coffin-like structures lined the walls, each one humming faintly, covered in dust and time. Inside each transparent shell, something moved. Not watchers. Not human. Something in between. The old man caught up to Reese, his face pale and stricken. He whispered, but in the dead silence of the chamber, it carried. These were the first ones. Reese stared at the figures inside the coffins. They were twisted, wrong, parts of them stretched or fused in ways that made his stomach turn. Experiments. Failures. Or maybe, beginnings. The hum grew louder, and the coffins began to flicker with light, one by one, in a sickening ripple that moved across the walls. They were waking up. Reese's hand found the old man's arm without thinking. "What is this?" he whispered. The old man shook his head, despair hollowing out his voice. "We thought the watchers were the worst. We were wrong." The first of the pods cracked open with a hiss of escaping gas. A figure stumbled out, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of too thin limbs and sagging skin. It twitched, then jerked upright with a motion that was all wrong. It lifted its head. Its eyes were human. Or had been. A horrible noise tore from its throat, not a scream, not a cry, something in between. Raw and broken. The others began to stir in their pods. One after another. Reese turned to the others, his voice sharp and urgent. Move. Now. They ran. The tunnel twisted again ahead, splitting into two passages, each just as dark and unwelcoming as the other. Reese didn't hesitate. He chose the left without even thinking, trusting instinct over reason. Behind them, the new creatures dragged themselves free of the pods, their movements growing stronger, faster, more coordinated with each second. Reese caught a glimpse of one sprinting on all fours, unnaturally fast, its mouth open in a soundless howl. They were hunters. And they were hungry. The passage narrowed sharply, forcing them into single file. The walls pressed close, the air growing hotter, thicker, like breathing through wet cloth. The ground shook again, harder, throwing Reese against the wall. Pain shot through his side, but he forced himself upright. No time. No stopping. A scream echoed behind them, one of their own. Reese didn't look back. He couldn't. The light ahead grew brighter, a harsh, unnatural glow that hurt his eyes. It wasn't salvation waiting for them. It was another trap. They burst into another chamber, smaller this time, the walls lined with massive black pillars that pulsed with the same sickly silver veins. The floor was covered in old debris, shattered pieces of metal, scorched bones, remnants of a battle long lost. At the center of the room, something floated above a circular dais. A key. Not a real key, not the kind you fit into a lock. It was a shard of something, something that pulsed and shifted as he watched, as if it were alive. The old man gasped. The heart. Reese stumbled toward it without thinking, drawn to it by a force he couldn't explain. His fingers brushed the surface, and the world exploded. Visions slammed into his mind, cities burning under black skies, oceans boiling away, 1,000 voices screaming for help that would never come. He saw the mountain, long before it became a tomb, a fortress of hope built by beings who had once walked among the stars. Beings who had called for help. And been ignored. Just like humanity. The heart wasn't a weapon. It was a message. A warning. The Watchers weren't invaders. They were the cleanup crew. Sent to erase the failures. And the things waking up behind them were the true legacy of the ones who had built this place. The ones who had thought themselves gods. Reese staggered back, the images searing into his mind, burning away any last shred of hope he might have clung to. They hadn't just woken the past. They had inherited its sins. The old man grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back into the present. Reese, he rasped. They're coming. The ground split open behind them, a jagged hole yawning wide. From its depths, a new form pulled itself free, massive, hunched, its skin slick and black as oil, its mouth filled with teeth too many and too sharp. It roared, a sound that shattered stone and blood vessels alike. The others stumbled back, some screaming, some frozen. Reese didn't move. He knew what this was now. Not an accident. Not a war. A test. And humanity had just failed. The creature lunged, faster than anything that size had any right to be. Reese turned, grabbed the heart and ran. The others followed, fear giving them strength. Behind them, the mountain tore itself apart. Ahead, the passage narrowed again, collapsing even as they raced toward it. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the whole place came down on top of them. Reese tightened his grip on the heart. He didn't know what he would do with it. He didn't know if there was anything left to save. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to die running. Not today. Not like this. The world around them shrieked and buckled, and the true enemy, the thing deeper than Watchers, deeper than hunger, rose from the earth to meet them. And somewhere, impossibly distant but drawing closer, something else answered their call. Not salvation. Not mercy. Something worse. Something hungry. They had called. They had been ignored. But now, something else was listening. And it was coming. The tunnel groaned under the weight of the collapsing mountain, each thunderous crack a countdown Reese could hear in his bones. Dust and shards of stone rained down around them, choking the air, making every breath a desperate fight. They ran blindly through the crumbling dark, the heart clutched to Reese's chest, its pulse sinking with the frantic beat of his own heart. Behind them, the creatures screamed, not just in rage but in terror, as if even they knew something far worse was coming. Reese stumbled, caught himself, kept going. His legs were lead, his vision swimming, but he pushed forward because there was nothing else left. A narrow shaft appeared ahead, barely wider than his shoulders. A weak light flickered from above. Daylight. Freedom. Reese didn't think. He shoved the others ahead of him, one after another, lifting them when they faltered, dragging them when they couldn't move anymore. The ground split open at their backs, the howls of the waking horrors almost on top of them. When the last of the others clambered up, Rhys turned to follow, but the old man caught his arm. "No," the old man rasped, his eyes shining with a terrible aching sadness. "You have to finish it." Rhys shook his head, gasping. "We can all make it." The old man only smiled, not in defeat but in understanding. "You're the last call." Before Rhys could protest, the old man shoved him upward, the strength of it unexpected, final. Then he turned, facing the darkness, and vanished into it. The heart pulsed in Rhys's hands, hotter now, almost burning. A choice. A demand. The others hauled him up and out into the blinding daylight, the mountain shuddering violently under their feet. They staggered away, coughing, bloodied, broken but alive. For a moment, it almost felt like they had made it. Then the ground split apart. The mountain didn't collapse. It erupted, a column of ash and fire and impossible shapes screaming into the sky. The heart throbbed once in Rhys's grip, then went still. The watchers, the creatures, all of it, consumed in the explosion. Gone. Rhys fell to his knees, the heart crumbling into dust between his fingers, the last traces of its terrible power fading into the wind. He thought it was over. He was wrong. The world didn't fall silent. Shifted. The air shimmered, rippling like heat off a desert road. The sky darkened, not with clouds but with something else. Shapes moved above, vast and unknowable, blotting out the sun. Not ships. Not machines. Something older. Something answering. They had called. They had been ignored. But now something had heard them. Rhys staggered to his feet, shielding his eyes against the swirling sky. The others stood frozen, fear written plain across their faces. None of them could speak. What words could match the enormity of what they were seeing? The largest of the shapes drifted lower, its surface shifting between solid and liquid, alive in ways Rhys's mind refused to understand. It wasn't just watching. It was choosing. A low hum built in the air, rising higher and higher until it drilled into their skulls, making their teeth ache and their bones vibrate. Rhys fell to one knee, clutching his head, but he couldn't look away. A voice, not a voice, spoke. Not to all of them. To him. "You are broken," it said. "And yet you persist. You are failed, and yet you defy failure. You are abandoned. And yet you remain." The shapes above shifted again, and for a moment Rhys saw something almost human in the way they moved, something ancient and tired and furious all at once. "You called. We ignored. Now you will answer." Rhys's mouth was dry, his mind racing. "Answer what?" he croaked. The thing above him pulsed once, a ripple of force knocking them all flat. The price. The choice. A new vision slammed into him, worlds burning, species screaming, 1,000 different histories all ending the same way, ignored, abandoned, erased. Humanity was not special. They were just next. Unless they became something else. The heart hadn't been a weapon. It had been a beacon. A plea. And now it was too late to take it back. The ground shook again, softer now, rhythmic. Footsteps. Rhys turned and froze. Figures were emerging from the smoke. Not watchers. Not the twisted things from the mountain. Humans. Oh, alive. But different. Their skin was marked with the same silver veins as the walls had been. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. They looked like ghosts, like echoes of the past brought to life. One of them stepped forward. A woman, or something that had once been a woman. She looked at Rhys and he felt something inside him shift. "You woke us," she said softly, her voice carrying across the ruin. "You answered." The others moved closer, surrounding them. There were too many to fight. Too many to run from. The woman held out her hand. "Come," she said. "The world you knew is gone. But a new one waits." Rhys looked at the others, the ones he had fought and bled and nearly died beside. They looked back at him, their faces hollow with fear and exhaustion. They didn't trust this. Neither did he. But what choice did they have? He stepped forward. The woman smiled. And then, with a sudden violent jolt, everything changed. The figures blurred, their forms twisting, reshaping. Not human. Not even close. It had been a mask all along. A lure. The creatures from the mountain had not been the monsters. These were. The sky tore open overhead, revealing a churning mass of stars and darkness, a gateway to something far worse than death. Rhys realized the truth too late. The Watchers had been trying to contain them. The creatures had been prisoners. Not invaders. And now humanity had set them free. The woman thing grabbed his hand, and the world dissolved in light. For one heartbeat, Rhys saw everything, the past, the future, the endless cycle of rise and fall, and understood. They hadn't been ignored. They had been protected. And they had destroyed the only protection they ever had. As the light swallowed them whole, a final whisper curled through his mind. You called. We answered. And now, you are ours. Of course, here's the full resolution, picking up seamlessly from the climax you approved. This will wrap up the story naturally, answer lingering questions, and leave a strong emotional impact with simple human words and without any AI feel. The light didn't kill him. It remade him. At first, Reese thought he had died. Floating in that endless brightness, he felt his memories pulled apart and laid bare, every failure, every regret, every moment of stubborn hope. They weren't ripping him apart to destroy him. They were understanding him, testing him. He wasn't alone. He could feel the others, struggling, fighting, trying to hold on to themselves. Some slipped away into the blinding tide, lost. But some held on. Reese clenched his teeth, squeezed his fists, and thought of everything they had fought for. Not survival. Not revenge. Something smaller. Something greater. The right to be more than just another forgotten echo in the endless dark. The light dimmed. When he opened his eyes, he was standing on solid ground again, but it wasn't the broken world they had left behind. It was a new place, quiet, strange, filled with a soft, golden mist that seemed to breathe with every heartbeat. The others were there too, scattered around him. Some still breathing, some still unconscious. But alive. For now. The silver-eyed woman stood nearby, her form no longer flickering. She looked human again almost, but her eyes gave her away. They were too deep, too full of something he couldn't name. You chose, she said softly. Reese found his voice, though it scraped like sandpaper in his throat. What did we choose? She tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she almost understood but not quite. Not to be erased. She moved closer, and despite everything, Reese didn't flinch. There was something heavy in her presence. Not cruelty. Not kindness. Just inevitability. You were supposed to end, she said. You're kind. Forgotten. Safe from what lies beyond. But you called out and you kept calling. So loudly. So stubbornly. Her voice softened, almost sad. You made it impossible for us to ignore you any longer. Reese's hands curled into fists. You could have helped. She smiled, and it was a terrible, beautiful thing. Help would have destroyed you faster. The mist shifted around them, and Reese caught glimpses, flashes, of other worlds. Some dead. Some dying. A few thriving in ways that made no sense. He understood, dimly, that what humanity faced was a choice they had never known they were making. Stay silent and wither away quietly. Or shout into the darkness and invite everything listening to take notice. We woke up something, Reese said, his voice rough. You woke us, she corrected. And others? Things you were never meant to meet. A low rumble vibrated through the ground, distant but growing closer. The others were stirring now, looking around with wide, fearful eyes. Reese turned back to her. What happens now? She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You survive. If you can. She stepped aside, revealing a path winding into the mist. It wasn't clear where it led, but it was the only way forward. Your world is gone, she said. The one you knew, the one you built. But a new one waits. Her voice softened, almost gentle. It will not be easy. It will not be kind. But it will be yours. Reese looked at the others. Some of them nodded, hesitant but willing. Some looked broken, lost. But all of them understood. There was no going back. He took a step forward. And another. Each one felt heavier than the last, like he was dragging the weight of everything humanity had ever been behind him. The mist thickened, swallowing them one by one. As they walked, strange shapes flickered at the edges of their vision. Not threats. Not yet. But possibilities. The air was different here, thinner, sharper. It smelled of metal and earth and something sweeter, almost like memory. They found remnants of cities, half buried in the mist, their architecture twisted by time and something else. They found rivers that flowed uphill, forests where the trees hummed quietly in a language none of them understood. And they found signs that they weren't alone. Footprints in the soft ground. Scars burned into stone walls. Messages scratched into metal in a dozen different languages, some human, some not. Warnings. Or maybe just echoes. At night, under a sky that burned with strange stars, they gathered around small fires and whispered about what they had lost, and what they might still save. Reese sat apart most nights, watching the shadows, listening to the distant rumble that never really went away. He didn't know what lay ahead. But he knew they had a chance. A real one. Because humanity had always been stubborn. Always broken. always refusing to give up. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days blurred together. They fought. They survived. They learned. Some of them didn't make it. Some chose to disappear into the mist, chasing dreams no one else could see. But most stayed. They built again. Not the towering cities of before. Not the endless noise and hunger that had once driven them to scream into the void. Something smaller. Something tougher. Something that might last. Reese stood atop a ridge one evening, staring out at the strange new land unfolding before him. Behind him, the others were laughing around a fire, the sound rough and honest. Ahead, the mist shifted, and for just a moment he thought he saw a figure standing there. Watching. Silver-eyed. Waiting. He didn't know if it was real or just his mind playing tricks. It didn't matter. He squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. The ground held firm beneath his boots. The stars above shivered, unfamiliar but somehow welcoming. They had called. They had been ignored. But they hadn't been forgotten. And now they would make sure no one ever ignored humanity again. No matter what it cost. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human. Not perfection. Not power. Not even survival. Just the endless, stubborn refusal to be silent. To be erased. To be anything less than everything they could possibly be. And somewhere deep in the endless sky, something heard them again. But this time, it listened. And it waited. And the story, their story, was just beginning.